right, well, it looks like probably everyone's in and ready to go. So welcome to our Keeping It Real panel, where myself and this lovely lineup of authors will discuss writing realistic dialogue. My name is Anna Hartnett, and I'm an author with Bold Strokes. I will be your moderator tonight. Remember to switch your screen to gallery view so you can see all of our panelists, and feel free to jump into the discussion chat or drop us a question in the Q&A box. We love questions. And I'm going to kick things off by introducing all of our authors. So I'll start with Alaina Erdell. Alaina lives in Ohio with her partner and their crazy but adorable cats. Prior to writing, she worked as a chef. And when she's not writing sapphic romances, she enjoys painting, cooking for her friends and family, experimenting with molecular gastronomy, reading, kayaking, snorkeling, traveling, and spoiling her beloved nephews, who seem to be arriving at an alarming rate. Alaina, what the heck is molecular gastronomy?
That's when they do fun things with chemicals in food. So when they do spherification or they make, spaghetti out of tomato water.
Oh, okay. I'll eat anything, so just don't tell me what's in it. And next we have Erin Kaste. Erin recently released her first Bold Strokes book. She is a Minnesotan misplaced into Memphis, Tennessee, where she lives with her wife, one grown child, and one almost grown child, and several four-legged creatures. She is currently a lapsed runner and loves the beach, the mountains, 80s music, and growing African violets and Christmas cacti. When not writing, she is a professional violinist. Congratulations on your debut, Erin.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Very
welcome.
exciting.
Yeah, so exciting. And next we have Clifford Mae Henderson. Clifford Mae Henderson, also writing under the name Clifford Henderson, was named after her grandmother, Clifford, who once wore a nightgown to a formal event because she liked it better than any other dresses she could find, of course. Clifford Mae's novels have received various awards, including a Forward Review Book of the Year Award, Independent Publisher Book Award, a Golden Crown Literary Awards, Rainbow Awards, Lesbian Fiction, Reader Choice Awards, all the awards. When not writing, Clifford Mae and her wife run the Fun Institute, an improv school in Northern California where they teach the art of collective pretending. Perfect for writing. And next we have Kathleen Collins. Kathleen lives in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania with a menagerie of feline, canine, equine, and avian friends to fill up her days. She enjoys all the usual things, writing, reading, long walks in the woods, to name a few. She is currently working towards a bachelor's in elementary and special education. And for someone that has a passionate aversion to all things mathematics, it is ironic that she now finds herself working in the tax field, and even more ironically, loving it. She is the author of one novella, The Ghost's Host, and the novel Wildflower. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Next is D. Jackson Leigh. D. Jackson Leigh grew up barefoot and happy, swimming in farm ponds and riding rude ponies in rural South Georgia. Her passion for writing led her to a career in journalism in North Carolina, where she lives with the Terrors, her three mostly terrier mutts. She edits news at night and spends her days writing lesbian romance stories laced with her trademark Southern humor and affection for horses. Jackson has won 3 Golden Crown Literary Society Awards for her novels and was a finalist in the romance category of the 2014 Lambda Literary Awards. Awesome. And last, but certainly not least, we have our fearless leader, our Sapphic commander-in-chief, a prolific author who needs no bio. Radclyffe has written multiple novels and short stories across multiple genres, including romance, paranormal, intrigue, and erotica. And hopefully you're keeping all of your animals warm in this winter weather. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick this off. I'm going to start with a more general question. So I'm going to start with Alaina. As we all know, dialogue is vital to making our characters feel authentic to readers. What are some ways to ensure that we are writing realistic dialogue?
I think there's a couple things you can do. Just listen to how people speak. Eavesdrop. If you're at the coffee shop, you don't be rude, but, listen how people are talking to each other. And, when I get to the editing stage in my work, I'll often use the read aloud function in Word. I don't know if you've ever used that, but I'll do my entire document. It's a little mechanical, but it gives you a sense of how it sounds. And if it sounds bad there. It's going to sound, bad if a narrator reads it or if someone else is just, reading it straightforward.
I've heard of a couple of people using the read aloud function. Does anyone else use that here?
Yeah. I use it to proofread, really, or
Okay.
to just hear because you hit a word and it goes, and you go, oh, I spelled that wrong. Yeah. So it's useful.
It's a good one. Jackson, what about you?
Yeah, I read aloud because I find that you find a rhythm, especially in dialogue, if you read it aloud as opposed to just write it. Um, the And I do it to proofread too because I read really fast, but when I read aloud, it slows it down. And the little words that I tend to leave out, which is when, if you're a fast reader, you read over, your mind just assumes them. I find I leave those out, and my editor, Shelley Thrasher, really appreciates it. If I read my manuscript aloud to myself before, I send it to her. So I find all those little words I missed.
Gotcha. Erin, how are we keeping our dialogue realistic?
I think I do read aloud also to myself. And I make sure that I can hear the dialogue in my head. Um, I'm listening for, each character's personality coming out into it, as if you'd be looking at physical characteristics. And in my head, if I don't hear it in different voices, really, it's not effective.
Gotcha. So it's gotta match the character you're writing, of course. Kathleen, anything to add?
I kind of do this a little weird. The words have to feel right in my mouth and have to, as odd as this sounds, have to have the right taste. Like when they're rolling out, it just has to kind of,
That's
I
the
don't know,
perfect description.
roll trippingly off the tongue, I guess.
Exactly. Rad, what about you?
Well, I'm very much the reverse in the sense that I dictate to begin with, and I think that helps me with the first step of dialogue because I think dictating, especially when you're really into the characters and you've done it a lot, it's a lot easier, I think, to dictate natural dialogue. It takes a lot of practice. A lot of people have asked me about the program that I use and should I use it for writing. And if you're not used to dictating, I wouldn't do it. It's very awkward to dictate if you've never actually had the opportunity to do a lot of dictating. But if you did it in work, I think that if you look at the page, if you have 3 or 4 sentences of dialogue, chances are it's not natural because that's not how we speak. We tend to speak in fragments. We tend not to speak in paragraphs. We interrupt each other. I think that's another thing that makes dialogue very natural is when characters, especially when they're very excited or angry, will tend to interrupt. I think that's another very natural form of interaction in dialogue between characters. I think you can get a lot from looking at the written page. If it's filled with narrative, you almost always have an absence of dialogue. And if it's all dialogue or long runs of dialogue, then that's going to need reworking. So I really like to step back and actually look at the physical page.
Yeah, structure should reflect the story you're telling and the balance of it for sure. Um, Clifford, do you have anything to add here?
Well, I think what Rad said was right on about people interrupting each other. And I think too, something I think about a lot is people often don't directly answer each other's questions. You say to somebody, would you pass me the salt? And the person responds, oh, did you call John? It's like we sort of talk at each other a lot of the time. So a lot of the time I like to think about what the characters want from each other in terms of what they're saying, what they really want. And also I think rhythm. And that's part of the interrupting thing Rad was talking about. Yeah, the rhythm of dialogue. You can hear it, like some conversations, if they're in a hurry, they're going to have shorter sentences than if they're hanging around having a drink and blah, 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 blah. So I think that too. It's just what state of mind are they in when they're talking?
Exactly. And while I have you, so besides bringing depth and authenticity to our characters, strong dialogue can be an effective tool in many ways. So, what are some different ways we can utilize our dialogue in our novels or whatever novellas, short stories?
And you're asking me first? Is
Yep.
that what
Yeah. Go
while I
ahead.
have you? Well, I think it's a great place for intimacy. It's a great place to contrast action versus what people are saying. Like if you have the action where their arms are crossed and they look angry, but they're saying, I love you, you can do a lot of fun stuff that way in terms of that. And I think, again, what Rad was saying, it can break it up. Like I personally panic when I see a page, if I'm reading, that is just thick paragraphs and there's no white space. As a reader, I'm like, so dialogue is a great place to, just pop it in there. And so, I mean, that would be the off the top of my head, what I would say, but intimacy and also just relaying of information sometimes. Like I just wrote a mystery. So sometimes, somebody has to reveal a big amount of information. But yeah, so I think dialogue does all kinds of fun stuff.
Does it all.
Yeah.
Red, what about you?
I think dialogue is essential to creating character. I think that what characters say to each other, how they say it, what they say about themselves, as Cliffy said, the interplay between what a character is saying and how they're saying it tells the reader a lot. And that's the whole point, is for the reader to get a sense of the character with you not telling them, but the character revealing themselves on the page. And they can do it through what they say and what they do and how they react to what others are saying and doing. So dialogue is one of the critical elements to create and reveal character. So for me, yeah, I would say intimacy, it's really important. I think it also gives you a sense of their personality, how they speak, if they curse when they get upset, if they pull back and go silent when they're aroused, for example. All of those things with dialogue will tell you something about character.
Sure, for sure. Alaina?
I like to use it to create subtext too. There's a difference between what the character is saying and what they're doing, or maybe the words can have double meaning. So, sometimes I'll use it that way. And I mean, I agree with the emotion when they're sharing something that's, traumatic or personal and being vulnerable. It's a great spot to build emotional intimacy. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Erin, anything to add to this?
Sure. I often use it to share background information, to keep, the long paragraphs from happening. But if you're writing in the first person, also, I really feel like it's very important to show what the other characters know.
Right. That's an excellent point. Yeah, when you're in that first person and you don't know the other perspective of the different characters, and definitely need some dialogue to shed some light on other character development. Kathleen, how are you using dialogue as a tool?
I mean, I think that it's an interesting way to show the difference between, like, I write a lot of first person, to show the difference between what the character is thinking and what they're actually going to tell someone. So it kind of shows, a little bit of their personality and their quirks, but also really kind of explores the depth of what we all do, because we all have all of these thoughts that we don't share with everyone. It just kind of gives almost an alternative story, really.
And Jackson, anything to add here?
I don't usually write in first person. I did one book, Unbridled, in first person, and the one I'm writing now is in first person, which I find more difficult. But you have to use dialogue as much as you can to fill out the other character, since you can't get in their head and talk. But interesting enough, the book that I have coming out next month in February, When Tomorrow Comes, one of my characters, main characters, is a high functioning autistic. And one of her quirks is that she speaks very properly and never uses contractions in her speech. And the other main character has extreme ADHD. And so their dialogue as characters is very different. One of them speaks very distinctly and with no contractions ever in her speech. That was really hard. That took a lot of editing back through again and again and again to catch all of those. And whereas the ADHD person tends to rattle on sometimes when they get excited. And so it was a real exercise for me and my editor in dialogue.
Well, this is a great lead into my next question. So Jackson, we'll start with you. Writing diversity is extremely important, and writing it well is extremely important. So how do you ensure that we are writing dialogue that is truthful and representative of cultural and socioeconomic groups that are different from our own?
Well, I've never attempted to write a Black inner city character because I'm sure I would mess up the dialogue. I mean, I'm just not well versed enough. I felt comfortable enough with the two characters in When Tomorrow Comes because I have a niece who is extremely ADHD, and I just modeled everything right after her, and the challenges that she faces, and the other character is kind of a combination of some TV characters that are high functioning autistic, and I felt pretty comfortable having binge watched a couple of those shows where they had those characters. There's like 3 different ones also I watched some videos of Temple Grandin, who is a well-known high-functioning autistic professor and speaker, and do a lot of research. But I think that we do need to represent these members of. I think that's what gives you some distinction as an author when you do go out on a limb and try to represent somebody that's not typical.
Definitely research. Rad, what can you offer on this topic here? Keeping it authentic across cultural.
It's a touchy and sensitive topic, and I think one that we have to approach really carefully.
Yeah.
I think what Deb was just saying is really important. I mean, to have either personal experience or to research not just the language, but as much as possible, the experience or the position of others that is not your own. One thing I would say to avoid is attempting to write dialect. I think that is very difficult to do. It's also very difficult to edit, and you also often get it wrong. And I think it leads to stereotyping. So that's the kind of thing that I would say not to do in dialogue. And we usually ask editors when we start editing, or authors when we start editing, not to do it, because it often is not through no one's fault. It just generally does not work well. Right. I think that when I write any character who doesn't have the same experience as my personal experience, and I agree with Jackson, I think that as authors, we can't be limited to only write who we are or what we've experienced. On the other hand, we have to gather as much information as we can, and first-person information, either through other individuals or through, the way I do it is through biographies, usually autobiographies, blogs, things written by individuals about their experiences. But I think that we have to be incredibly sensitive, and we probably should be using sensitivity readers, either through our publisher, which what we try to do if we need to, or through our own personal circles, if we are writing characters whose experiences and identities are much different than our own.
Gotcha. Yeah. Does anyone want to add to that? Feel free to pop in. Okay. We do have a couple audience questions, so I want to pop over to that. First, for a novice writer new to creative writing, what suggestions would you give to help someone learn how to write dialogue? Um, let's see. Clifford, do you want to start us off there?
Sure. What's obvious is go sit in a coffee shop and listen. I mean, that's a great thing to do, and really listen. I'm not saying record people's conversations. That's probably tacky, but also, you know, my background is in theater. Read plays. Read plays. They are all dialogue, and they get so much work done through dialogue only that that's where my background is. And I feel like I have been so fortunate to really, through playwrights, to study some of the best dialogue written. So that's a possibility too. Yeah, that would be what I would say.
That's a brilliant suggestion, I think. I think that that really shows you how to create a scene and set a scene where it's almost all dialogue.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you have to reverse the process and fill in the subtext, the insights, and the narrative. But it's a great way to look at natural sounding, you know, dialogue.
Right.
Yeah. And that dialogue does a lot of work too. It pushes a lot forward.
Totally.
It does everything. So, and then, you know, the actors, directors, whatever. But the writers, Marcia Norman, oh my God, you know, there are some great playwrights out there that are just worth looking into. So, yeah.
What we're missing is the movement on stage that, you know, we as novelists have to create that movement within our work that the actors can do on the stage, and they do a lot with their body positioning and how they move around the stage, and we have to create that through our narrative. So
and the setting, how beautiful it is, and all the costumes. That's what you get to do as a writer. How fun. But yeah, as a playwright, you just get what they say. So yeah.
So Erin, do you want to hop in here? I feel like as you just released your first book, so maybe you have some recent experience on learning how to write authentic dialogue.
I am fascinated by the idea of reading plays. That just I love that. I spent when I was very young, my parents used to drag me around and expect me to be very quiet, and so I spent a lot of time in my head. And I think, you know, listening to your internal dialogue, listening to what's around you, I think that's very important.
Does anyone want to add any advice here? Alaina?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go first. There's just a little thing.
Oh, same. I was just going to say, don't try to be too perfect because, you know, dialogue is fractured when we talk with people and people put in, you know, A's and ums and, you know, you can overdo it with those too. But yeah, and somebody will rarely go on for the length of a page. It is a dialogue, not a monologue. So make sure you have a back and forth.
Yeah. Really good points. Could I make one quick? Please learn how to punctuate dialogue. I know it's a technical thing, but for first-time writers, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, it's really important because it's uneditable. If a work comes in where all of the dialogue is not properly punctuated, it's almost impossible to edit. It's a killer for a manuscript.
Gotcha.
The other thing is, yes, don't try to put into dialogue sounds, especially during sex.
Okay.
Lots of ohs and ahs, and okay, they all are going to get edited out. So avoid attempting to write sounds.
Well, that actually leads nicely into our second audience question here. What are your thoughts about dialogue in the middle of a sex scene? Let's start with Kathleen.
Oh, you would pick me for that, wouldn't you?
You look like you wanted to, you just had an answer at the tip of your tongue.
Ironic choice of words. I mean, I feel like if it's true to life, if it's something you've experienced, then go for it. But you know, that isn't always the case. I think sometimes that really can take away from a scene. I'm all about the descriptive narrative.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's see, Alaina.
I do use dialogue in my sex scenes, and one of the reasons is for consent, because I do think, you really need to have something verbal to have that.
Consent is sexy. All right. Anyone want to add? Anyone have a strong opinion about dialogue in a sex scene?
I always use dialogue in a sex scene. I don't use a lot, but I do think that you can start choreographing the sex too much if it's all narrative, and then you've got a lot of hands moving and legs moving and bodies entwining, and sometimes you need to break that up. And I think that you can reveal a lot of intimacy in sex through short, little brief snippets of language. So I always do have some dialogue.
Okay. Do you feel like genre has anything to do with kind of the dialogue we're using in sex scenes? Let's see.
Open question?
Open question.
Well, I don't write romances, so I don't write sex scenes. So there you go. That answers that question.
Come on, Cliffy.
Yeah.
No sex in your books.
There's love in my books. There's tenderness, but I don't go into the sex scenes. No.
All right.
Sorry, readers.
I think that's a great question. The dialogue in sex, in erotic sex, is very different often than the language of love in a romance. They're very different sometimes in terms of the graphic nature. And again, it has to be in keeping with your characters and in your work, right? In the story.
So I wanted to go back to something Rad was talking about. So in terms of punctuating dialogue, well, there are other things that go into dialogue besides just words, as we all know. So let's talk about the role of dialogue tags. Should they be as invisible as possible so as not to disturb the flow, or can they be used descriptively to help paint the scene? I'm sure you have a big opinion, Rad, but I'm going to skip you for now. And I'm going to let's go to Kathleen. Start us off again. I know.
I guess you could go both ways with that. It could be super descriptive. It could really help you set the scene and the inflection. But I think when you have really good dialogue, those tags sometimes are not necessary because you can hear the characters in their voices in your head as you're reading it. And they're kind of superfluous.
What about you, Erin? Did you get some feedback from your editor in your first draft about dialogue tags?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I go between sort of invisible things and descriptive tags. I think especially when something is ironic or somebody is being a little bit sarcastic, and it doesn't necessarily come out in the dialogue, I think sometimes it's important to be a little bit descriptive there if there's something that is unsaid.
Gotcha. Yeah, I also think we can sometimes lean on exclamation points or adverbs, and I know those tend to get edited out a lot. So, Rad, do you want to weigh in here?
Well, when I first started writing, there wasn't an adverb I didn't love. I had to really I had to unlearn that. And I think that Kathleen, her point was right on in that the dialogue should convey what you want to convey in what you're saying. I do think that if you judiciously interject objective appearance in the dialogue, you can say something and then the person can show some action or some expression that will enhance the dialogue. But in general, I would say no exclamation marks ever. Mm-hmm. They're just all going to go, because if you need one, you haven't used the right words, right, or you haven't introduced the action quite properly. I think that if the dialogue could be taken in two different ways, then maybe you do need to add something like, Riley or grimly or whatever. But in general, you don't need them.
Grimly, I like that one.
I know it's hard for me to, give them up.
Was it Stephen King that said the path to hell is paved with adverbs?
Yeah.
Clifford, anything to add about tags and adverbs and exclamation points?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, sometimes for clarity, if for whatever reason you have a lot, I mean, it's helpful to know who's speaking. So always clarity is always the top of the list for me. Just be clear, be clear, be clear. But usually often what I do is I just pair action with the dialogue. So I say, she threw a glass across the room. How could you? Like, who's speaking then, and if you compare those together, a lot of the time you don't need the tag. And it's giving you action, which is way more exciting than a tag, I think, usually. Get you involved in a prop or get you doing something else. She looked down at her manicured nails and said, sure, I love you, or something like that, right?
Yeah, I
So
love that. Let's add some action for context. And
yeah, I think that'll do the trick for you a lot of the time. Yeah.
Jackson, what about you?
I agree with Clifford. I try to pair some action because when people are talking, they're not usually just sitting there like a lump. They're giving you some kind of body language or something, and I think that adds to the tone of what the dialogue. If you put that in there, so it also breaks up big chunks of dialogue. But also something that I've run into more recently as a writer. A few of my books are in audio, and so now when I'm writing, sometimes I think when I have some back and forth dialogue that's pretty fast, I think, oh, should I put she said or something in there? Because what if they put us in audio? You'd never be able to, you might lose track of who's talking. Does anybody else worry about that?
With all the
Brad?
she's
I am much more cognizant of it now, but what I tell the narrators is to go ahead and put in a tag. If they're running into 3 or 4 lines of dialogue and especially with most of our work, we've got people of the same sex, so that
Right.
you can't do she's, and the pronouns aren't helpful. So that I will just tell the narrators right up front, go ahead and insert a dialogue tag if you feel that the dialogue is not, it's difficult to distinguish the voices. So, but I learned from reading Jack Reacher, Lee Child's books. If you read his books, they are written for audio. There are lots and lots of dialogue tags that ordinarily you wouldn't need, but it was fascinating to me to read that. So you do need the tags for audio, but if you've got more than 2 or 3 lines of dialogue without something like Cliffy said, action to indicate who's doing what, you need a tag because readers will get lost. So that's a nice, if I've got 2 or 3 lines with no tag, then you ought to put in a name.
Yeah.
Okay. Alaina, do you have anything to add about tags or punctuation?
Yeah, in terms of tags, I use very few. I think I had like 5 instances of said in my latest book, and some of those were added during edits. So, but there's a sort of belief among a lot of writers that you're only supposed to use 3: said, asked, and whispered, with infrequency. And I can't quite understand why you really need ask most of the time because you have a question mark. So it seems a bit redundant to me. But I think, like Rad was saying, I think they can be big gaping potholes for you to fall in with your adverbs too. So you have to watch out.
Fair enough. Okay, so what are some things that you notice that make dialogue sound unrealistic? Alaina, you want to kick us off?
And Jackson, I'm not going to refute what you were saying because I understand that was a different situation, but a lack of contractions is what always gets me. People don't speak so prim and proper usually, unless you have someone. I read a book recently where the woman was, aristocratic, British, upper class, very prim and proper, and she spoke, just that way, and that made sense for her. But most of us don't speak that way. So my last book that I turned in when I was doing self edits, I was like, well, I need to I realize I'm using contractions for many of the common ones, but I'm not for some of the other ones. And I'm like, maybe I don't even know what all of them are. So I went and I looked and I did not know what all of them were. I was like, I'm going to go through my document. I'm going to search every one. And I was like, I have never used this. I don't think I've ever said it. So, but I think that helps if you're using contractions.
Yeah, fair enough. Erin, how, like, when you read dialogue, what pops out to you as making it unrealistic sounding?
Yeah, I was also going to say if it's too proper, if you would not use something when you're talking with a friend, it's going to stick out as something that is not realistic.
Exactly. Clifford, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think if people are listening completely, 100% responding, I just don't think that's really how people talk usually. I mean, we're doing it here because you're asking a question and we're on a panel, but people are usually slightly distracted when they're interacting with each other. So, I always think of it as people's sort of different objectives bumping into each other. And so I think it just shouldn't be too like, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? La, 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 la. It should be to not to have the dialogue be unexpected sometimes, the responses, and you get a feeling of two different personalities coming together. So I think that's it, where it's just not so like, I'm such a great listener, I'm going to respond exactly to what you say, and you're going to respond exactly to what I say. I think that's unrealistic, mostly.
Does anyone else want to pop in and add to this topic? Feel free to.
People do not speak with semicolons. Never be a semicolon in dialogue. I am willing to say that. Never, never. Do not put semicolons in your dialogue. we generally we generally don't speak in paragraphs, as Alaina said before. We speak in fragments. Sentence fragments are very realistic. So I think that's another thing that will help your dialogue, because that's how we speak. The other thing to avoid in dialogue is what we do in our daily lives, which we don't need to read in our novels, is, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? It's great. How's yours? It was good. What'd you have for breakfast? All of that stuff, it's all going to get edited out. The thing about novels is it condenses our life, so that it's not always exciting and it's not always the pivotal moments, but it takes the quotidian, the normal of our lives, and it condenses it into this much more intense experience. So that sort of back and forth is just wasted space.
For sure, for sure.
Can I add something I forgot really quick?
Of course, yeah.
Names. Think about, the last time
Yes.
two people have had a conversation, you and your significant other, you and your best friend, you are not using each other's names every sentence. So the overuse of names, I think, can make it feel so false quickly.
Yeah. They
Yeah,
all get wiped.
that's a real good one. Let's see, Jackson or Kathleen, do you have anything to add here about things that feel unrealistic?
They pretty much covered it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think it's pretty well covered. I just, I think as writers, we're observers of life. And like someone was saying earlier, you just listen to when other people are talking. And you do a lot of scenes that I've had in my books have been scenes where I've been somewhere and just been listening to, and people say some of the most interesting things. And I do avoid, most of my books are set in sort of an ambiguous South, not real Southern. The only time that can remember that I've really used dialogue is if I had a character that was sort of a caricature of a person, like a waitress, and Take a Chance. In a small diner, and she was real Southern, and so I did use some, pretty stereotypical, over the top, the way she talks. But most of my characters, even though they're Southern, I often ask, in fact, I've emailed Fred before, and she would, call and say, we're going to use this narrator for your book or something, anything special in here, any special pronunciations. I'd say, just please tell them don't do a Southern accent, because unless they are Southern, it's not going to sound right. It's not going to. There's little things that will indicate, in the dialogue and the words that you use, that indicate sort of where the character comes from. It took me a while to get used to say, people were saying, you want to come with? And I'm like, with who? Because where I come from, you say who? You want to come with us? And to me, that labeled them as a certain area, regionalism, a certain area of the. So I think you can say a lot in dialogue that tells a lot about the characters. But everybody else has pretty much has it covered.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. So how can we deploy dialogue to either structurally or emotionally emphasize a scene? I think Rad touched on this a lot. Do you want to kind of give us some more detail with that, Rad?
Well, I think that I actually was going to tag on to Erin a lot earlier in terms of plot. I think that dialogue is a great way to reveal plot. And I know that when I did it a lot when I was writing the Justice series, because I think when you're writing series that are very plot heavy, one good way to sort of advance the plot is to have two characters, especially the one character who happens to be a cop, be able to tell the other character what they're planning to do or what, the next action is going to be, so that you can actually move the plot forward with dialogue. So I think that that's really a really good way to advance plot. And I think that the dialogue itself, I mean, basically there's kind of like, three basic ways that dialogue reveals character: what they say, how they say it, and how they respond to the dialogue, to the words of others. So I think that, and that's what Cliffy was saying earlier, and when someone says something, how the other character responds reveals a lot about how they feel. And I think that dialogue is absolutely as essential as narrative. Those two things really not only drive the story, but really help us develop our character.
Definitely. I mean, that was such a great answer, but does anyone want to add to that? Kind of how we can use dialogue to progress the story or emphasize?
Sometimes it's a great way to start a chapter. If you pop right in with dialogue, that can be really a fun thing to do. And then, and you don't necessarily have to even know where these two people are. You get this sort of floating dialogue. And then right after that, you kind of bring the reader into where they are and what's going on. And that can be kind of a way to, I don't know, I always feel like it kind of just grabs the reader by the.
Yeah, kind of like an anchor.
Yeah.
Bring you back into the story there.
That's one little thing. I don't know.
Alaina, were you going to add something?
Oh, I think it can help with pacing. If your sentences are shorter, not just dialogue, but narrative too, when you have an intense scene, say like, action or maybe even a sex scene, it's going to make things seem to be moving faster. And, on the opposite side, after you've put a reader through that, you need to give them a chance to breathe. And so you can lengthen your sentences and put your dialogue tags back in and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Let them settle down.
Point. Let's see, Erin or Kathleen, anything to add there?
I think that sometimes you can, if especially if you're very dialogue heavy, which I am, I think silence often emphasizes, especially tense scenes, things like that. If all of a sudden you start, going back into descriptive things instead of the banter, I think that can really change the feeling.
For sure. Kathleen?
I mean, that's something that I struggle with. I am a lot more tell than show in that sense. So this is all good information for me.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm taking notes over here myself. So All right. So, what is your favorite dialogue to write? Is it tender romantic scenes, conflict and fight scenes, or sex scene dialogue? We'll start with Kathleen.
I love me some witty repartee. The banter, the showing a little bit of sass and humor. I feel like it really draws people to characters, and I've tried to do that. In Wildflower, it wasn't as easy. That is a very heavy, emotionally driven story, but when I could add that in there, it felt like a sigh of relief.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone who caught your reading last night can tell that it's going to be an intense story. Erin, what about you? What's your favorite dialogue to write?
I agree with that completely. I love doing banter, and my first book was sort of a dark thriller type of thing, and so it just I think it feels better from time to time to have just funny banter going on between the characters.
Excellent. Clifford?
Oh God, I love all dialogue really, but I guess a favorite thing is when people are trying to figure each other out and they're kind of awkward with each other a little bit. I think that can be really fun when people are sticking their foot in their mouth and I think that can be kind of fun. I don't know, but I just love dialogue in general. It's my happy place. So yeah, but I do like those awkward scenes. I do like those awkward scenes.
Who
Yeah.
doesn't? I mean, that's just life. Alaina,
Yeah.
what about you?
Kind of a boring answer, but I like them all. I don't know that I really have a favorite. I do think you can have some really beautiful opportunities for emotional intimacy in a sex scene, and you can have some very poignant moments, but I like it all.
For sure. Jackson, favorite dialogue to write?
I like those flirty moments, um, where you're getting to know the characters are getting to know each other. When they reveal, they use a little flirting to reveal to themselves to the other character. Um, like let's see, for instance, one of the main characters in one of my books says had mentioned that she had noticed the other one much earlier. She's saying, I noticed you before. And so the one that was sort of nonverbal, that didn't have a lot to say, when that character is walking off, um, Lacey says, "Hey," and the other character turns around and she says, "I noticed you too." And
That
it's
was my
just that
favorite
kind of
moment in that book.
it's just that kind of flirty dialogue that comes to as you're writing. You think, you put yourself in the moment, and then it just comes out. It's that flirtiness between two characters. I think is
Yeah.
the most fun for me.
I mean, flirting is definitely fun. Rad, I'm gonna guess yours is conflict. Am I wrong?
I was going to say that there's two, really. I really like the tension early on. I really like when two characters are a little bit at odds, but what they are is more attracted than at odds, and that comes through in the dialogue. And it tends not to be flirtatious in an overt way, but in a way that allows the reader to feel that and the other character to know that there's something going on. But what I like the best is the romantic declaration. For me, the height of a romance is the part where they're expressing their love, usually during or after sex.
All right. We are kind of running out of time here, but real quick, we'll do a little rapid fire. Do we like writing dialogue or narrative better? Rad, you start.
I like narrative.
Narrative. All right. Jackson?
I like dialogue.
Dialogue. Okay. And Kathleen?
Descriptive narrative for the win.
Okay. Clifford?
Dialogue, dialogue, dialogue.
Dialogue. Erin?
Definitely dialogue.
And Alaina, you could tie it up.
It's tight, but I'm going to go dialogue.
Oh, dialogue wins 4-2. That was close though. Well, does anyone have any final things to add here? Feel free to jump in.
You've been great. These are great
Great moderator.
you came up with.
Yeah.
Really good
Guys,
question.
stop. You're making me blush. But thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to hang out with us tonight. But stick around for the next panel. It's starting in a few minutes. It's called Work in Progress, all about character journeys, and it's moderated by Radclyffe. You don't want to miss it. And don't forget to go to the BSB web store because we're having a sale on our 2023 titles. Thank you guys so much. Stay warm and cheers.
Thank you. Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.